If you spend enough time in tech design, you will get to know Soleio. He's the person that every designer calls up when they're working on a cool project and they want to take it further. Soleio ran Combine, an investment fund. And before that, he led design teams at Dropbox and was one of the earliest designers at Facebook, now Meta. Soleio is also the best design recruiter I know, and his eye for spotting design talent is legendary. Today, he shares how he distinguishes extraordinary from ordinary talent in design. Hey, Soleio.
Hey, how are you?
I am doing super well and really excited to have one of the greatest minds. You're somebody that I've always respected. So I think you have one of the best eyes for design talent. Like, you were one of the best recruiters I've ever seen for designers. And you then went on and invested in so many designer-led companies. And I think you're just like a legend in our industry for somebody who knows great talent. So I'm super excited to try and learn from you today on how you see excellence in design.
I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. And I'm thrilled to be on the show today. This is going to be fun.
Let's get started with just where it begins, right? You see a design portfolio. Maybe because you're a designer, you're trying to add someone new to your team. Can you describe, when you look at a design portfolio, how do you tell what you would consider, let's say, average or pretty good, and what is truly excellent to you? Like, what stands out, and how will you tell the skill set of a designer from looking at their portfolio?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple qualities that often come through. It's important, I think, for designers developing a portfolio for being hired or getting spotted, to recognize that the people doing this line of work are often rummaging through a lot of portfolios in a single block of time. And so it's not as though they're sitting down and looking at one portfolio for every 10 minutes. It's often a spreadsheet stacked with 40 or 50 or maybe 100 URLs that they need to get through in an hour. And so if you imagine a similar exercise, like just going through records or videos at a Blockbuster in the late 20th century, you're kind of rummaging and looking for something that might be interesting and setting aside those URLs for more careful scrutiny. And to me, like, these are often portfolios that have high intent behind them. They have something visceral in their quality. And I'm often gravitating towards like things that have a really strong core message or concept. When portfolios are just, grids of projects, and when there's just a lot of generic text, I often end up putting them in the second pile, which is like, may be interesting if I got more time to kind of rummage through this, but that second pile is often going to go ignored when compared to the first pile, which is, oh, it's interesting. This person kind of understands that they need to stand apart from the broader set, and they've got an interesting lead. And now I kind of want to double click and spend some time rummaging through their projects and seeing what they have to say about themselves and their work. And so the thing I always look for is just something unique to say, and something that has a really vivid and strong concept behind it. And sometimes that can just be as simple as just looking at your work in a grid of other portfolios and seeing, like, am I communicating in this small little window of opportunity the most salient thing that I have to say about myself and my experience and what I want to do?
Can you maybe give us an example of, like, if you think through like the last month or so, like, what's a couple that stood out to you, and why did you have that reaction?
Let's see. I often point people to a friend and colleague, Gabe Valdivia, who had a tour of duty at Facebook and now runs his own independent practice. He's one of these like gold standard portfolios because I think he does a really great job of articulating the range of projects that he works on. He presents a really clear-cut idea, which is this idea of like a fractional design leader, which out of the gate, it's just, to a lot of hiring managers or people who are looking for design talent, they want to have an idea of like how they would work with this person. And he's also not afraid to put himself as part of the story and get a sense of what it is like to work with him. And so within a single scroll, you can kind of move through a range of projects, how he presents them in a really visceral manner. And it's like a really tidy catalog of his experience and his approach to working with startups. Another fellow who recently joined the team at Perplexity, Lau Klein, he was working at NASA and JPL, and he was a lead designer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where he works on all manners of visualization software that's used by NASA for actual working missions. And I love that he, in one tidy little embed, one little window, he sort of paginates through a range of projects that show a pretty diverse set of skills, from like canvas-based UIs, iconography, using 3.js to visualize things, to like pretty sophisticated software that's clearly intended for use by spacecraft engineers. And I love that, like how economical portfolios like this are in terms of laying out the story of the individual, their skill range, and the kinds of projects that they might be able to speak to. And so it makes it very easy to dive deep. And that's often the thing that I find is lacking in a lot of like, mediocre to mid-range portfolios, is that they don't provide these moments of interest where a hiring manager can plummet into a project and have like an hour and a half worth of questions to ask about that project. And so that's the thing I think that's really important for portfolios to provide, is the fodder for that first phone conversation, for that screen call. And in my mind, like any portfolio that's sort of suited for highlighting the type of work that a person wants to do or can do should be able to speak to the past projects that are most exemplary of their skill set and approach.
I think what I'm hearing you say is actually you're touching on so many different things in one. It's like very dense. The first is this idea of range. So the projects have like a showcase of like, there's different things that the designer has done, and they're able to express that. So it's not like every project looks the same. So that's one element. Maybe another is you use this word economical, which I really love, which is this idea of like don't make me click a lot. Don't make me have to do a lot of work. Like I don't have a lot of time. How quickly can you give me like kind of the highlights of the range of projects? And then if you have my interest, I'll go deeper. And then there's like something here that I can continue to explore in a portfolio. So it sounds like that's something. It's like don't overwrite text. Don't like get too wordy and make people read like this very long treatise. I think the third thing that I also heard you speak about is this idea of like standing out. Like if you actually just follow what everyone else does and you're like, I check the box, it actually won't be one of the things that will catch somebody's eye when they're going through 40 portfolios. So there's something about like, well, if I know what everyone else is doing, what's like my own unique angle on the thing?
Yeah, and sometimes it's in the form of like unique projects. If all of a portfolio consists of, say, 5 years working at one company, right? And you're sort of just limited to the aesthetic of that company's products and the range of problems that sort of sit within that corporate vessel. It doesn't suggest that there's a deep passion for making software or making digital experiences, as it might be the case for somebody who interweaves not just their employer projects, but also just little side projects on their own, the things that they tinker with and play with. Another great example of a portfolio that I've always loved is Nicholas Jikoff. His portfolio consists of a range of like side projects, things that he kind of built and shipped. And they're really tidy, small, self-contained snow globes, but they're live on the web, and you can fork them, use them, try them out, have an opinion about them. But it sort of speaks to the type of software designer that he is, and what kinds of little doodads he wants to create. And it in my mind, it sells the simple argument that he likes making software, he likes doing this work, and it's really hard to compete with people who have a fervor and a passion for their medium, no matter what form it may take. And so to me, it's like side projects is not an example of having free time. It's more of like an example of having a passion for the work that you do.
So let's actually get into this, because there are a lot of portfolios where people work in the confines of a larger company. And so they show work, and maybe the work looks very polished because we've used these apps and we've had these experiences. But it's kind of hard. I always find it's hard to know, like, what did that person do? Or how can I understand this individual? Because the work as presented is the work of many, many hands. So now you talk to them, decide to have a conversation. How can you assess in a conversation with a designer, what is like an average or pretty good all the way to like truly excellent?
That's a terrific question. If it feels like a dance, then they may not have a lot to say about the project and their involvement in it. Whereas somebody who has spent a lot of time and energy in a particular problem space has a lot to say about it. They understand the contours. They can navigate the project with their eyes closed because they've spent a lot of time in it, and they can sort of speak to where their side of the bedroom starts and the other people in the project, their part of the bedroom resides. And I think that for me, I'm always heartened by people who can quickly telescope into the details because they are coming at it from the confidence of having spent time working at that level of abstraction, and they're comfortable with drawing the boundaries of saying like, yeah, I was responsible for XYZ, and so did these parts of it, and they can kind of give you a lot of the details on who contributed what to the process. And so a lot of it's just asking the but whys to kind of like double click and burrow into the nitty gritty particulars of the project, but also asking questions around like what was attempted, what sort of ended up in the cutting room floor and why. When I think back on my own projects where an initiative went through major evolutions, the parts that we discarded are still kind of vivid in my mind because you had to kind of almost like molt that skin off in order to arrive at a future form. And you don't get that molting for free. Usually it comes through some form of pain or realizing you're going down the wrong path. And you like had some early conviction that you're really excited about. And you're like, oh, actually it turned out it was not as great of an idea as I originally thought it was. And maybe there's some glimmer of hope for that idea elsewhere. But a candidate should be able to provide some granularity and some texture to the nature of the project and how other people contributed towards it. It's often a red flag when they are sort of the solo character, especially if you know that the amount of software produced is beyond what one person could have accomplished. Now, there are cases where, it is the case that one individual produced a project, but I still think it carries that property of having a certain amount of fidelity to it. They can kind of talk about the contours with a high degree of specificity. And that often speaks to somebody who really cares about the craft.
So replaying back, I should be able to ask, hey, what part did you do and what part did other people do? And you get like a very granular piece, right? To your point, like they're able to tell you at a very fine grained level, like I worked on this part, this is what other people contributed. I'm hearing you say as well, like there should be a lot of detail. And in fact, almost like show me all the stuff that didn't work or that you tried or the assumptions that you had. And there should be like a lot to say. And if it's almost like the story's too tidy, like we should get a little suspicious. It's like, there's not, if there's not like to your point, the pain, the detours, like here's all the stuff that I tried and it didn't end up working or we didn't end up doing it, but then it's a little harder to discern like, okay, is this now just a polished story or is there actually that level of depth and craft? Is that right?
Yeah. And I think there's always a degree of hardship, right? To anything excellent. There's this Hollywood trope that, show me a happy set and I'll show you a terrible movie. Or something along those lines, and I've always felt like that's kind of true. There's a bit of residual pain with any great initiative, and so I think speaking through to what are the constraints that you stumbled into, what are the hardships that you ran into, what are things that you learned by virtue of getting in front of customers and realizing, oh gosh, we need to course correct in this dramatic or significant way. I think it's always just great fodder for conversation because I think you can then extrapolate it towards how one would problem solve future hardship, future difficulties, how they sort of tackle design challenges in the abstract.
How do you think about the way that a designer tells the story or answers the question? Like how much does, for example, if they get to too much detail and they're rambling a lot and they're going to a lot of little things, does that change how you assess excellence? Because, there's obviously the work might speak for itself, but then there's also how does the designer talk about it? Like, how do you assess? How do you look at that?
I mean, for me personally, I do find an aesthetic in economy, and I do appreciate it when people can take a complex body of ideas and distill them down without sacrificing the complexity as subsequent discussion if it's warranted. And I think that, depending on the hiring context, sometimes you may want to hire for that, right? Somebody who can, for example, present 3 weeks worth of effort in a 30-minute product review with senior executives. And therefore they have to be really economical about kind of distilling the nature of the project in that context, because you don't want to be long-winded. You don't want to provide a bunch of like unnecessary details. That's not the thing to mire execs in. But at the same time, I find that in order to maintain pace in a fast-moving team, you also do have to be really economical about how you discuss ideas and how you set the stage for feedback. And I think in general, it's just a good muscle to be constantly thinking about like, what level of abstraction am I operating within? How much information do I need to be able to provide in order for a person to be able to give like salient feedback? And how do I do so in a way that combines not just like word and speech, but potentially like visuals, like visual aids to help guide a process along. And I find like really great designers are terrific at essentially setting the work environment, the thought environment, through a combination of like demos, visual aids, and then having the adaptability to say, okay, if we get sort of stuck on this area, how can I make sure that I provide the additional layer of information necessary to make forward progress without derailing the whole conversation because we're going to rat hole on some detail that's actually not that significant. There's an element of like economy there, but I think there's also some comfort with ball control. Sometimes you need to be the designer in the room who can kind of control the conversation and say, like, we're not going to actually rat hole on this, because at the end of the day, this is the crux of the decision we need to make. And so I find that the most strategic designers are able to identify when the ball control is being lost, and then they have the moral authority and the comfort to ask for the ball, to essentially drive the conversation to where it needs to go.
Talk to me a little bit about feedback, because everyone's got an opinion on design. So what does like pretty good look like in terms of designers responding to feedback from stakeholders versus like a real excellence or mastery of that craft?
Oh man, this can be a whole half-hour conversation. I think to try to distill it down, I think that a lot of design work has real-world impact down the road, and that's ultimately what you're trying to do. You're trying to create solutions to problems. You're trying to create experiences for end users and customers. And so I think that the way to structure feedback or set the stage for feedback that's ultimately effective is that it's always triangulating towards some downstream impact. I've often described design as like a bridge between company strategy and the desired end user experience that you want to create, and what that intent is, and design is all the capabilities to manifest that experience, whether it's through software or through a beautiful marketing campaign, or even just a sticker that appears on a helmet in the middle of London, right? All of these things are just expressions of design and the desired experience at the end of the day. And so to solicit high quality feedback, in my mind, one has to be constantly angling towards, well, what is the vision for the company, and how is design an expression of that vision in this particular context? Where feedback tends to fall astray is when you sort of get stuck in some local maximum. You're trying to make the artifact, the project, excellent in isolation. And when it doesn't serve this holistic aim, I find that that's sometimes where you don't get this same bang for buck. You don't get as much juice for the squeeze. And there's a missed opportunity to create something that's a little bit more holistic, and that has a higher likelihood of creating like demonstrable impact down the road. Or that can be something that's a building block for something bigger.
Can you give an example of maybe in your own experience or in experiences you've seen where a project got into that local maxima rather than maybe keeping eye on the prize?
Oh gosh, let me think. Because this is one of those squirrely, don't want to throw a team under the bus.
Yeah.
I'll speak to my own experience. I'll throw myself under the bus. There was a period in time when I was working with our mutual friend Mackenday on a project that we called ShareBar. And the basic idea was like, okay, it would be amazing if maybe for all outbound links from Facebook, we kind of provided a set of controls at the top where we sort of put the external link inside of an iframe and have like all these really great like social app features that kind of followed you to an outside property. And it was just one of those ideas that you can quickly fall in love with. And we spent a lot of time refining. We were spending time with like figuring out how to make sure that the underlying URL didn't break. What was like the key context to kind of take into consideration so that the bar would show the right set of functionality for a given outbound link. And it ended up being such a self-serving project that, of course, when we started to release it, people hated it. People felt like Facebook was hijacking their web experience. And I'm not sure if we had thrown more energy at it, we would have been able to offset that sense that like we were maladapting the URLs that were being shared, that a person who posted a link or sent a link to a friend was having that link being intercepted and manipulated, you know? And so it forced us to then kind of confront this core principle around like, well, we should not be altering, you know, person-to-person communication. Like if person pasted this link on the site, like this is what the recipient should receive, not like what we think they should receive. And that was a difficult lesson for me because I think we were honestly trying to enhance the Facebook experience and have it start to bleed out into the wider web. But it was a very self-serving approach to product development. It kind of was self-justifying in so many ways, and it felt like an example of a project where like if we had sort of took a step back and looked at these broader product design principles that the company was adhering to, we would have quickly realized that we were designing for some local maxima, and that we were designing an experience that's a bit more self-serving than like useful to the end user.
Yeah, I find that happens a lot is because, you know, we are part of often a company and we have objectives. Like we want to hit our revenue goals. We want to get the user to click on this button more so that something good will happen, more engagement. Maybe another pattern I'm noticing is like, you know, often the local maxima is like when you start optimizing for like a company goal or a team goal, rather than going back to like where's the user at and what is going to help them. Because ideally it should be win-win, right? We do something that the user wants that also helps our company. But if we get too attached to like the particular problem or the solution in some ways, or even the company goal, it actually can get in the way of us doing something truly excellent. And I think what I'm hearing you say is like really great designers, they can navigate this, like they can steer and they can like be the one to pop up and say like the feedback here is not relevant because it's like where it's too localized and we need to kind of go to the source.
And I think that when teams sort of hide from customers in this way, they can sometimes inadvertently miss out on a crucial bit of input to help steer their strategy. Another example that comes to mind is how much work we put into building a standalone photos app at Dropbox called Carousel. And that at the end of the day, one of the most damning moments was when we realized that people were very reluctant to give us access to their full camera roll because they were concerned about the impact on their storage quota. And we could have de-risked that months and months before we got to the point where we were polishing an onboarding experience. But we never sort of thought to involve our users in that decision making and sort of like looked at it from their perspective on why a standalone camera app or photos app would be really useful and novel to them, especially the users that were using Dropbox for free and were trying to actively manage their quota so that they wouldn't have to pay us. And so we created this incredible, almost insidious adverse selection on the product that at the end of the day, we stacked months and months of effort, like millions of dollars worth of effort into this project. And so like the bitter lesson of both the share bar and also of Carousel is that if you hide from your users for too long, you're really going to pay the price. You're introducing a lot of risk, and you're also you're operating in almost like willful ignorance of what people want.
So I've heard a lot of people ask me this, and I'm sure I've asked you this, which is to say, look, in these examples you gave, the share bar or in Carousel, if these things didn't work, is that what I should expect from my designer? Or is that something like that's the PM's job? You know, I'm going to go down hard, performance review is going to be impact. Like, how do you see what excellence in design really is, or maybe where you draw the boundary, if there is any, as you see the way that people think about these roles?
I think that when people delegate impact and strategy to PMs or other people on the team, they cannot ask for the title of excellent. They're mitigating their own impact. And to me, like the truest measure of excellence is what sort of positive, open-ended value do you create for people along the way. And sometimes it requires you to be in the role of a PM, or to be asking the questions that a PM ought to be asking, triangulating the desires of the customer that you should know inside and out, with what's possible. And in my mind, like, excellence is not not being a spectator to those questions, but rather being a participant. And the amazing thing about, design as a medium, as a craft, as a way of approaching the world, is that you can give extraordinary definition to the what if. You can prop up entire universes with the tools that we have today to help shape those questions and those conversations and potential answers to the what ifs. But I think that when designers sort of play it safe and let others dictate the problems to tackle and the whys, I think that they inadvertently limit their impact on the work that they're doing.
I love that. Don't delegate your impact. If you do, it's very hard for us to get to that level of excellence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you get this a lot too, which is that, let's say I'm a CEO and I'm looking for advice, and I say things like, Soleio, I'm not sure my design team is excellent. Can you help me figure out what the issue is? How do you diagnose whether it's my expectations or whether it is actually a team issue?
Those are always delicate conversations, because it has throw someone under the bus scapegoaty energy. And so I often start with, I try to diffuse it by asking, okay, if I join your team for a month, what would I work on? And I find that it's a shortcut to the crux of the matter, which is, can a CEO articulate a strategy that fuses design to some ultimate intent, some end experience? And is that something that they can do on a dime? Because I think really excellent CEOs can. They're talent greedy, and so they're very resourceful when it comes to answering a question like that. That at least gives me some sense of what is the environment in which this team is operating within. Because if the CEO cannot articulate the strategy in a concise way, I would not expect the designers on the team to be more adept at that. And the CEO's ultimate responsibility is in managing how the company sees the world and how they operate within it, and what future state they wish to achieve as a company, what resources and capabilities do they want to accumulate, and how they want to serve, people out there in the world, their customers or users, maybe even future market segments. So there's a question of what is the company strategy? And then from there, how is design currently serving it, or maybe not serving it? Because then at least you can start to compartmentalize. Maybe it's a lack of staff. Maybe we just are great at making products, but terrible at generating demand for these products. Or maybe it's we're really good at the what ifs, but we're not great at shipping. We're good at ideating, but nobody seems to want to actually roll up their sleeves and make stuff that ends up in customers' hands. But it helps me at least understand the problem to be solved. And in much the way that you've often articulated, that design is this motion of taking a big gnarly problem and trying to find the discrete parts and almost untying it and compartmentalizing it and breaking it down. I feel like when troubleshooting the dysfunction or supposed dysfunction of the design team, I think that there has to be a high degree of accountability within the founders to start the conversation, and it kind of cascades down from there.
Do you find patterns in the companies that you've advised or that you've seen where sometimes you actually come to the conclusion, these designers are really good. These are excellent designers, but they can't do their best work in this environment. So what is it about an environment that doesn't allow the designers to truly be excellent?
So the most common pattern I observe is the designer as production resource. It's the designer that's involved at the tail end of a thing. They sit downstream a series of decisions. Maybe there's a board meeting, and then the product team met, and then some definition was drafted, and now you, designer, go execute on this vision. It's often circumstances where the design team has 10 things that they need to be working on, and they only really have capacity to produce 3 or 4. And maybe they don't have a whole lot of say in what those 10 things are or how to prioritize the 3 or 4 things within those 10. In all of those scenarios, the design team is not really empowered to ask the but why. And then more importantly, they're often seen as the bottleneck to progress, because there's 10 things that need to get done yesterday, and the design team's only executing on 3 or 4. And so they're the problem. We need to expand their capacity. That's one pattern that I see is really commonplace. It's like a lack of prioritization and the lack of the design team's involvement in prioritization. But I think the second pattern would likely be the one where there's designers who don't like to ship. They are much more comfortable generating concepts and ideas, but for whatever reason, they don't feel the accountability, the urgency for what actually ends up in the hands of customers. And that's a more common pattern than you would expect at startups, which is, the whole conceit of a startup is you get to go and ship stuff. Like you have the shortest path to getting things out to market. But sometimes there are designers that feel reluctant to be accountable for that. They sort of feel like, well, if it's the engineers, and then the engineers are the ones that ship. And I feel that in the year 2025, you've run out of excuses now. There's so many extraordinary tools at your disposal to help with the process of getting things out the door. And it's just good for you. It's wholesome. You'll learn a lot more as a designer being accountable for what goes out the door and iterating on things out in the wild than you will operating from an ivory tower.
If I'm a product manager or I'm like a founder, how can I tell if that's happening? Is it that the designer isn't dog fooding, or is like what are the behaviors that might lead me to suspect that maybe I have the situation where the designer is just reluctant to be accountable for the end thing?
I think that there's are they participating in all of the rituals and processes for pushing to production? How frequently you're pushing to production, and do the designers even know when pushes happen? And then are they on the hook for supporting releases? That's like one set of questions to ask. There's also the input output. Take an individual, you sort of see what are the inputs, what are we sort of giving them, and what are they outputting? If the outputs are purely just Figma files and things that are not interactive in nature, if they are not like production assets and things that you sort of would expect end up in the hands of users and that they feel accountable for, that often is symptomatic of being a little bit divorced from the production process. But I think it's also just looking at your own processes. If you look at how the sausage is made at your company, are you setting the expectation that designers that are staffed to a particular initiative, that they have to maintain some cycles available to seeing this thing across the finish line? Or are they peeling off to the next thing because they just don't have the bandwidth to support a push to production?
Right. It's like what we were saying before. Yeah. If there's too many projects, then likely, a designer has to draw a box around, like they maybe aren't in the why and the asking and the fully understanding what we're trying to do. And then they're not there to kind of see it through to the end either.
And there's sometimes a dynamic that gets inadvertently created because if you're short-staffed, you are going to reward the throw it over the wall and work on the next thing behavior, right? That will be seen as a designer who's being very productive because they're sort of helping pay down the organizational debt. But I worry that in that scenario, it divorces the designer from the end customer experience or being accountable for what actually ships.
Back to the idea of understanding when an environment makes it hard for the designer to do their best work. How do you think about the way an excellent designer navigates a ton of different stakeholder opinions? Because that can be extremely challenging. Now, again, best case scenario, everyone's super aligned. We're all on the same page. We all, agree on the goal. We know the boundaries. We let the designer do their thing. But, sometimes you go into a situation, there's a lot of opinions. Everyone's got an opinion on design. And everyone's like, do this, do this, do this. How do you see a masterful designer be able to take that and actually still produce something great with it?
I use the term ball control because sometimes a really excellent designer needs to just take control of a project, explain what they're going to move towards and what they've incorporated into their sets of decisions. And they need to kind of own the outcome. They need to kind of call their own shots, but then be accountable if it doesn't land, if it doesn't generate the impact that they expected. And I think that truly excellent designers are not shy about that. They'll make mistakes too. And sometimes those mistakes can be very costly. But I think that, for every design hero that we have, there are flops in their resume. We just don't kind of remember them with as much clarity as we do their greatest hits, right? I love the G4 Cube that Apple produced many, many moons ago, and the little iPod Shuffle. But I don't know if those were massive hits for the company. And yet, like, you need people who are willing to kind of take aggressive bets and incorporate all the feedback that you get along the way. But if your design intuition breaks from the feedback, you should be able to say why you're going to charge forward with this particular direction and then feel accountable for being wrong.
I hear you say that you have to almost stand up sometimes and be like, look, I hear you. I think something different. We're going to go with this. You can hold me accountable if it doesn't get there, but we can't, like, there's no consent. Like there's sometimes there just isn't an ability for every single stakeholder to feel like we got a thing, because we always say this, like, it's like design guide committee doesn't actually ever get, like, it gets you a, what is it, a camel instead of a
camel.
car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking personally, like, when I look back on my time at Facebook, the project that I'm probably proudest of was the redesign of groups in 2010. We had about 90 days to ship it. We had an amazing team. But when I joined it, it felt as though we had too many chefs in the kitchen and we were trying to do too much in too little time. And like you said, everybody had an opinion about which direction the product should go. And I think if we had sort of taken this much more consensus-driven approach, we would have never come. It would have taken less than half a year or a year to get that thing out the door. But I felt as though, like, my time at the company had lended me enough moral authority to say, guys, I think we should do it this way. You got to trust me. The most important thing for us to do for this company at this juncture is to get this project out the door. We can layer in all kinds of updates and changes after we get it out the door, but we've got to, like, crash the beaches. We've just got to get out there. And I promise you, we'll have so much more momentum being out in production than we will sort of just warring inside the war room. And Andrew Bosworth wrote this wonderful essay about our experience in groups that I found was really charming. But I do internalize it as my favorite contribution to the company, because it changed the nature of the network that we'd built up until that point. It was the highest impact project that I probably did there. And to me, it was a testament to just sometimes you have to ask for the ball and just eat all of the responsibility that comes with it. And I always encourage designers to do that. It's worse to not ask for it and then know that you could have had an opportunity to have a demonstrable impact. But it comes with a tremendous amount of responsibility, and you have to be really accountable for communicating the why. Like, okay, I'm going to go this way. And in my particular case, what was urgent was that we got out the door in 90 days. And so it required us to be hyper disciplined about what we were not going to be doing until after we were out the door.
I love that. Yeah. Trust me. You can hold me accountable. Like, it's so powerful. Soleio, what's different about what is there, or maybe is there a difference today about what excellence in design looks like today versus 5 years ago?
I think the biggest change is with these new tools, we see more range. We see projects that have more of a world feel to them, rather than that they sort of track to one toolkit or one motion or one discipline of design. And I feel as though, like, with modern AI teams shipping software where it feels like there's a spirit to every release, motion videos and incredible websites and an awesome product experience, and it's like one or two designers behind all of this surface area. Excellence to me is the coherence of that spirit. It feeling like it is done by one hand without sacrificing the texture of what you're seeing. We sometimes capture that spirit of Facebook, but I think we almost, like, simplified the visual UI and we had no brand. And so it was almost like we were able to achieve the same effect by, like, blunting the visceral nature of the product.
Make it sparse and
make it super sparse, yeah. And so it had a Fisher Price quality to it. But I don't think you have to be elemental by design anymore. And so I love seeing these modern teams that have a lot more sprawl, a lot more of a visceral nature to their products, and where it feels coherent. And so I feel like excellence is going to be as much in the patina and the specific little micro interactions as it is in the orchestration of that entire experience. And And you feel it when you see a product announcement and they unapologetically say that they're available on iOS and Android and on the web and on, in the smart glasses. And you're like, my gosh, how did these people get all this stuff done in one shot? I think it'll carry that quality of feeling like it's a large team behind it when in fact it's very small.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Well, I guess that flows into the second question, which is like, well, what parts do you think AI is going to increasingly do more excellently than humans? And what parts do you feel like actually this is still something that when you think about where excellence is or where you think it's going to be in the near future, like it has to be done by people?
I feel pretty bullish about AI replicating stylistic treatment and inferring the more granular details of design. And it's only going to improve on this matter. I think AI will be well suited to kind of give us also some structure around the scaffolding of best practices. If you take 10,000 examples of well-designed bedrooms, you'll start to see patterns emerge. And that's not to say that you couldn't express in some unique way in the context of, say, designing the interiors for a bedroom. But it would be almost silly to ignore the best practices, the feng shui of a room, right? And applying them to your own context, which room, which direction the room faces, how many windows, what are the entryways, what are its dimensions, and so forth. And so my hope is that AI will help at least raise the floor on the awareness around these things that you might only have experienced in the past through just sheer reps and volumes you sort of have an intuition for, but that AI could potentially make very discreet, very explicit, and that you can act along that grain or you can act against it with some purpose. My hope is that designers will just recognize that they can have a lot more impact, not through the patina, but through the orchestration. It will always be the case that you'll get to fine tune and polish the details of the X-Wing, but you can also now work on the Star Wars universe. You can prop up entire planets. And I'm more excited about the latter and the people who are doing the latter, because every once in a while you land on an entirely new giant franchise. You create a Mandalorian, and it has this self-blooming quality that in my mind will probably be the most distinct quality of software creation to come, that it'll have this world building aspect to it that I find quite novel.
I love the way that you expressed that. It's almost like we can go from the micro in some ways. Like, okay, most designers, you're thinking about a particular flow, a screen, a page. And now I think you're saying, look, we can think bigger. We can think about apps, and not even just apps. It's like not just individual iOS app. It's like the whole set of experiences, in the multimodal way, right? Android, iOS, web, like you mentioned the glasses, and then it expand perhaps even further. I wonder, do you think that now with AI, more and more people who maybe weren't traditionally taught or trained in the ways of designers, maybe who don't even self-identify as designers, could be excellent in this particular craft or discipline?
I suspect so. I think that there's always going to be space for the beginners, and especially in a world where nobody really has a head start with any of these tools. And so in much the way that I expect tomorrow's Spielberg to be somebody who makes films without a camera, right? I expect that maybe tomorrow's designers will be somebody who doesn't have a ton of familiarity with maybe a lot of the conventional UI tools and patterns that we're accustomed to, but that may not work against them if they pursue a product line that is maybe hinges more on story and narrative and how you generate demand for that product or for that system that grows its own products or has some sort of maybe UGC motion where people are making their own experiences. I've always loved the Ben Horowitz quote that like a company's strategy is indistinguishable from its story. And I think that there's like a very profound truth to that statement that I feel as though like if we sort of start to move into a world where designers are equal parts experience makers as storytellers, then you're sort of developing a set of skills that encompasses not just how you make something that's really, really useful, but you make something that's really, really desirable and that people feel like they belong within, that they sort of operate within.
Closing question. What's one thing that everyone can do, like a practice, maybe a small thing that they could do every day that would help them become better at having an excellent eye for design?
Oh, that's a great question. Gosh. I really love just checking out people's websites. I feel like half the designers that I end up DMing, it's usually like me saying, hey, your website's down. You didn't pay your domain bill. Just FYI. People do pay attention. And I don't know, I think that, just rummaging through how people are expressing themselves creatively, especially through some handled means, is one way. Look for side projects. I think that's also just the frontier of creative exploration, where people get to kind of just dabble and make stuff just for its own sake. But then lastly, I think the other thing is nothing gives you a more discerning eye than making. I think that there's something to be said about, the Nicholas Chekhov approach to software, which is like make small bits of software, even if it's the total addressable market of like your best friends. You'll find that just by making, you start to make yourself accountable for the value of a small unit of a thing. And how we do any one thing is how we do everything, right? And so you'll sort of start to feel what matters to you in the expression of something small.
I love that. Thank you, Soleio. This has been so fun. I could talk to you for hours. So thank you so much for spending time here and sharing all of your insights.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's great to see you, Julie.
Great to see you.